Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Master Filing Amended and Superseded Returns on Form 1040X. This webcast is brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor Magazine and Drake Software. I'm Gail Perry, Editor-in-Chief of CPA Practice Advisor, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to explain briefly how continuing education credits for this webcast work. The webcast qualifies for 1 credit of continuing professional education, and also, if you need it, it qualifies for 1 IRS CE credit. If you plan to earn credit for attending this session, you must stay with us for at least 50 minutes. In addition, we will display 4 polling questions during the webcast. You'll need to record an answer for at least 3 of these questions, as this is our verification that you are still watching. Later today, you'll receive an email from CPA Practice Advisor that contains a link to your CPE certificate, assuming you met the requirements for CPE. If you are needing IRS CE credit, you should have entered your PTIN number when you registered, and we will turn in the numbers to the IRS after the event. Please note that we can give continuing education credit for multiple people watching on the same computer, so if there are others in your office who would like to attend this event at the same computer, please have them join you now. And at the end of the event, you'll have an opportunity to send us their email addresses so they too can receive credit. At any time, you can enter any questions you might have in the Ask a Question box provided on your screen, and our speaker will try to get to as many questions as possible during the live presentation. Questions not answered during this webinar will be addressed by the speaker afterwards via email. Slides are available for download by clicking the Event Resources option at the bottom left side of your screen and then clicking on the PDF file that's displayed. In addition, there will be an archived version of this presentation available on the CPS Practice Advisor website after the event ends. Note, though, that CPE credit will not be available for watching the archived version. Today, we're joined by Amanda Watson, Senior Manager of Customer Retention at Drake Software. And now we are ready to begin.
Great. Thank you so much, Gail. I appreciate that warm welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Again, my name is Amanda Watson, and I am with Drake Software and have been for many years. And it is a pleasure to be here this morning with you on this webinar. And I know that it's always great to be able to interact with a group of tax professionals who I know care about your clients and care about these services and that you offer your clients. So today we're going to talk about a topic that affects us all, and not just during tax season, which of course we are heading into pretty quickly, but it does affect us year round, and that is amending and correcting returns. And whether you're working with first-year filers or a seasoned business owner, we know that mistakes happen, and the IRS knows it, your clients know it, and we all know it. And as tax professionals, of course, you are likely the ones who are expected to fix whatever problems exist. So today we're going to unpack when to amend, when to supersede, and how to efficiently do so with some best practices there. And today we are focusing on amending individual returns. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk about the difference between amended and superseded returns, and we're going to clear up some common confusion, even amongst tax pros. And then we're going to talk about, of course, some best practices for filing Form 1040X, including the e-file process. And then we're going to finish up with some processing times, how to manage client expectations, and hopefully some tips to make your workflow more efficient when you are working with amended returns. So what are some reasons why taxpayers amend returns? And there are a myriad of reasons. Often it's something basic, that there is a missed source document. The taxpayer forgot to bring you a W-2 or 1099, or the K-1 arrived after you filed. And this happens pretty frequently, and unfortunately it does. But sometimes it's more so of a credit or deduction that they may not have realized that they were eligible for. Maybe they didn't give you their daycare expenses and they qualify for the child and dependent care credit, or they contributed to an IRA after they filed the return. Sometimes, however, it can be more complex. Maybe they were affected by a natural disaster that of course happens, and or maybe they want to retroactively claim a casualty loss, or if the filing status was incorrect, someone marked single when they should have been head of household, or vice versa. And then there's the returns for deceased taxpayers or situations involving injured spouse claims. And each one of these scenarios, and even many that we didn't mention, have their own nuances, their own rules, and most of all, their own deadlines. So it's really important to pay attention to those things. So the first thing I'd like to distinguish today is, what is the difference between amended and superseded returns? And I found this to be one of the most misunderstood areas, even beyond, even among tax pros. And it all comes really down to, I think, one thing that really is the difference, and that is timing. An amended return is a corrected return that is generally submitted after the due date of the return. It doesn't necessarily replace the original. Instead, it modifies that original filing. A superseded, on the other hand, is one that you would file before the due date with extensions, and it completely replaces the original return. It's almost like hitting the undo button and submitting a better version of the return. So the really important thing here, when you think about the differences, is when it's filed, as in most cases what we would see. So I like to break it down and make it simple, because it is a little confusing for some. So if you think about this, you think about, maybe you have a birthday party that you're preparing for. Maybe it's your child, your grandchild, and you're baking a cake, the birthday cake. So the night before, you mix up the batter, you throw it in the oven, and just as you're finishing up, you realize that you forgot to add the sugar. So what you do, you toss out that cake and you make another one right away before the party. So that's kind of like a superseded return. It's not too late because the party hasn't happened yet. So you can completely, dump out your old batter and create a new cake in time for the party. So it's not a total disaster. But let's say that a different scenario, the party has already started. And then when kids are eating the cake, they realize that something is not tasting right. The kid said, "This tastes terrible." And then everybody's looking at you, and you realize that you forgot the sugar at that point. Now it's too late. You can't take the cake back, but it's already been served, and sliced, photographed. But what you can do is go back to the kitchen and make a new cake, or new cupcakes, or whatever it may be. And that's really like an amended return. You're not replacing the original cake because it's already been served, but you're correcting what you can after the fact. I know that is a kind of a fun example, but hopefully that helps. Remember, amended is going to modify the return, and a superseded is going to replace it. So let's just take a quick look at the differences between the two side by side, just for a little extra clarity. And now there are smart reasons to supersede, I should say, rather than amend, especially if you're in that original filing window. And one of the more common reasons to supersede rather than amend is that you can fix a missed election or modify that election, because we know that many elections must be made by the due date of the return. So an amended return that is filed after the due date may not be eligible to make those elections. However, if you're still in that time frame, you can file a superseded return and you can completely replace that. And I see a question coming in from Kenneth that says, can a superseded return be electronically filed? Yes, it can. And we're going to talk about e-filing in just a moment, but I just wanted to go ahead and answer that question. Yes, superseded and amended returns can be e-filed. Again, we have the differences contracted here as the purpose. An amended is meant to correct or change the original. A superseded is meant to replace. Timing is generally what determines the difference when you would file which. An amended return, of course, is after the due date generally, and superseded is generally before the due date or on. And e-file is available for both return types for the current tax year plus 2 prior years. And that follows the same logic that we see with e-file eligibility with Form 1040. So it follows the same time window there that you would have for just an individual return. So there's nothing special to remember on that, current plus 2 prior years. All right, so I think that now is a great time to introduce our first poll question, and Gail's going to come back and help us out with that.
Okay, this is the first of 4 polling questions. What is the most common reason you file amended or superseded returns for your clients? And your answer options are customer forgot a source document or some other information, correcting returns prepared by someone else, correcting an error that you made, changes to tax laws or rules, or none of the above. So pick the answer that's most closely aligned with what happens in your own practice or what your experience has been, and then go ahead and click submit. If you have any trouble answering this question online, like if you're on a phone or a device that doesn't have the question pop up, you can enter your answer in the Ask a Question box and we'll record it there.
Great. Thank you, Gail. I'm seeing the survey results come in, and it's pretty interesting, but aligns with what I have seen other professionals explain. Most of you, over 60% of you, are telling me that, excuse me, most of the time your amendments are due to the customer or taxpayer forgetting a source document or providing or information. So generally, it looks like it's because the taxpayer forgot something, which is very understandable with the complex tax system they have. Okay. All right. So I think we're ready to move on. I have a question here. One question is, can a superseded return be filed if no extension was filed? A superseded return must be filed by the due date of the return, including extension. So if it's past the due date and no extension was filed, generally that would be no. And the next question is, do you have to wait for assessment to file a superseded return? And when you say assessment, I think that you might likely mean processing on the IRS side for the original return. I would generally wait until the return has been accepted if it's filed electronically, just so the IRS doesn't get confused. But, now with modernized e-file, you should get an acceptance within generally minutes, unless you're on one of those super high volume days. And Morris, yes, the question is, can a superseded return be filed before the extension due date? It is before the due date of the return, including extensions. All right. Then the next question, I'll take a couple more and then we'll move on. It says, for superseded, does the timing included extensions mean April 15th, assuming you don't file an extension? And yes, there would be April 15th for most calendar year taxpayers. Generally, that is April 15th. Yes, if they don't file an extension. Okay, I missed it, but how can you file a superseded return when the due date has passed for the prior 2 years? Oh, yeah, that is a good question, Tom. And it was on that slide. It's probably just kind of an oversight there because you can't. The returns are eligible if you file it on Form 1040X. Okay. All right, let's move on to slide 6. Now, one thing that when we talk about amended returns, those are filed on Form 1040X for individual taxpayers. And timing, again, is everything. You must file 1040X after the 1040 or the 1040 series of return it has been filed. You cannot amend a return that has not been filed yet. And sometimes that even though that is it's maybe a little simple, but that is one of the things that the IRS sees a lot of. It's simple but important. You can't file more than one 1040, so you can't file a subsequent 1040 to amend the return. The 1040X is not a substitute for the 1040 when you're talking about, of course, amending returns. And make sure the original return on file is processed generally before you begin correcting anything. And like I said, with e-filing, generally that is very quick. If you've paper filed a return, I do recommend that waiting until that original return has been processed through paper. So amending a paper filed return is going to significantly delay that, just because if you e-file it, or the IRS could get a little confused with the sequence. So it's really better to wait. So if you have a 1040 and there is a refund due, the IRS gives taxpayers 3 years from the original due date of the return, or 2 years from the date the tax is paid, whichever is later, and that is to claim a refund on Form 1040X. Now, one thing that's really important to remember about filing a 1040X is the processing time. It is significant. Generally, I think it takes about 16 to 20 weeks. That's an average. So when you're working with taxpayers who may need to amend return, it's important to set expectations up front, and sometimes maybe even often with clients, because it's not like filing a regular return. Just before our webinar today, I looked on the irs.gov, and today is January 5th, and they are currently processing amended returns that were filed in August of 2025. So they're several months behind on those returns that for processing. There is, I think, a significantly manual process for the processing there. So I've zoomed in on Form 1040X here, just because I think it's really important to see what actually happens on that form. And this is just a random snippet of this, it's a very zoomed in screenshot. And you can see here on Form 1040X, if you've never really looked closely at one, the column A is the original amount. That's going to be the amount that was previously filed. And B is going to be the net change, and C is the correct amount. Now, if you're using tax software like Drake software, Drake Tax, it's going to do all of that for you very nicely. But it's really important as tax professionals, even when we use software, to understand exactly what's happening when we are filing those returns. Okay. There's a question here. It says, how do you tell what they are processing at this time? And Dina, you can go to irs.gov and you can just search for it, processing times, and it will tell you what timeline they're on. So this morning, they were showing that they were processing amended returns received for individuals in August 2025. So it's all right there on irs.gov, and we'll talk about some other tools you can use too. Okay. Marie, thank you for telling me I'm not looking at the camera. I'm looking at my screen, so my camera's in a different spot, but sorry, my screen is in a different spot, so thank you for your grace with that. Okay, so again, these are some things I just want to reiterate. I just already mentioned these. File 1040X only after Form 1040 is filed, which seems pretty simple and self-explanatory. However, it is one of the more common errors the IRS sees with e-filing of amended returns or filing. All right, so let's talk about e-filing of amended returns and how that came about. Now, I have a little history on this slide. Back in 2020, before 2020, the IRS did not accept any amended returns electronically. And if you were around in 2020, which I'm assuming most of you were, you probably remember that is the year we had the COVID-19 pandemic. And there were delayed due dates from the IRS, and it was a really slow processing time that year. The IRS sent home a lot of their staff, so we saw significant delays. So in August of 2020, the IRS decided that we were ready to e-file amended returns, which really honestly couldn't have come at a better time considering the state of the IRS at that time. I remember hearing reports of the IRS having mail stacked in tractor trailers, waiting for someone to open it. So at the time, e-filing was definitely the way to go. It really still is. But in August of 2020, the IRS says, hey, we're going to have a little test and we're going to e-file some 2019 amended returns. But there were some guidelines. There were some restrictions on returns that could be filed. So in August of 2020, the IRS said, hey, you can e-file 2019 amended returns. And in order to e-file an amendment, the original must have been e-filed. And we're not going to offer direct deposit on these. And we will only let you e-file and amend it up to 3 times. And you can't use an e-filed 1040X to change the filing status or the taxpayer ID number. So that was back in 2020. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I think it's important to know like how the regulations progressed, because sometimes you remember something that's not valid anymore. So I like to just cover that. And in 2022, so this was a couple of years later when we started filing 2021 amended returns, the IRS lifted some of the restrictions, which included now you can e-file a return even if the original wasn't e-filed. So if you paper filed the original, you can now e-file the amendment. However, the IRS does ask, and you can check it out on irs.gov, they generally say if it wasn't the same tax year, if you file a return by mail and later the same tax year you want to amend it, you should probably not amend that electronically just to give that paper return enough time to process. And you can kind of keep an eye on that. It's just maybe a good best practice there. And the IRS lifted the restriction on changing the primary or secondary Social Security number. So that could be changed electronically too. And then in 2023, when we started filing 2022 returns, which was now unbelievable 3 years ago, the IRS lifted the direct deposit availability. So now returns can be e-filed with direct deposit for refunds, and they started accepting superseded returns via e-file. And those are the guidelines that we see in place today. So just to summarize that all, as we head into tax season, here are some guidelines that you can, when it comes to e-filing Form 1040X. The IRS first has a hard limit on the number of times you can amend or supersede returns for each tax year for each taxpayer. That limit is 3 per tax year. And it's important to note that it includes amended and superseded returns. So if you supersede twice and then you amend once, then you've hit the cap for that. So it is, of course, per tax year. If you amend a return 3 times electronically last year, you still can e-file this year. You can e-file that amendment. Now, what years are eligible? We kind of talked about that earlier. You can e-file the current year plus 2 prior tax years. And again, direct deposit is available now for e-file only. And that is a stipulation that was in, with the 1040X e-filing it. But that is, I think we'll see more guidance on that as the IRS works to execute the executive order about no paper checks. So I probably won't see paper checks on those paper filed, but I don't have any specific guidance for 1040X returns. And if you can, it is a great idea to use direct deposit for those. And of course, the original return is not required to be e-filed unless it's paper filed in the same processing year. And you can now change filing status and ID number. Okay, I'm going to take a look. I have several questions here. I'm going to try to answer a few before we go on to the next thing. It says, is it advisable to note on your tax return when it's being superseded? If so, where on the tax return would you do that? Kenneth, your tax software should really do that for you. Like indirect tax, for example, we have a box to check if you're superseding, and it puts everything where it goes in the electronic XML data file. Okay, I'm not finding the processing time. Oh, okay. I can't guide you to that yet because I can't really Google it during the presentation, but it is, the processing time is, you just go to the IRS. You can go to amended return frequently asked questions, and there should be a link there to the processing times if that helps. Yeah. Considering potential changes for tax law in 2026, is it expected that the process for using 1040X will change? I do not know if the process will change. As far as what we have in place now for 2025, I don't see any changes there. Are superseded returns included in IRS statistical analysis, or only for the final accepted version considered valid? That's a great question, one that I don't know the answer to, so I'm sorry about that. Is the processing time the same for amended and superseded returns? It could be. I would generally think a superseded return may process a little bit quicker than the amended return, because it is completely replacing that initial return. Okay, and now I think we're ready. We want to get these poll questions in so everyone can get their credit. So back to you, Gail.
Okay, this is our second of 4 polling questions. Have you ever e-filed an amended or superseded return? And your answers could be yes, no, or I'm not sure. So go ahead and pick your answer for that. And if you can't answer it on your device, you can put your answer in the Ask a Question box and we'll record it there.
Okay, thank you, Gail. I'm looking at the answers coming in, and so far it looks like most of you have filed an amended or superseded return electronically. Some of you haven't, but that's okay. I think that it's a great option. E-filing makes it a much smoother experience, both for you and your taxpayers, a little bit faster processing, a little bit faster refunds, and of course, no mailing delays. All right, thank you, Gail. So we'll just continue with our next topic, and that is, well, our next point, I guess, and that is Form 8879. And I think it's an important detail that is easy to overlook for some tax pros. Every e-filed amendment or superseded return requires its own separate Form 8879. It isn't really just a formality. The IRS treats each amended return or even a superseded return as its distinct submission. So even if these changes are small, if you're filing a 1040X or a superseded return a superseded return, your original 8879 cannot be reused. You must obtain a new signature from the taxpayer. So I think that's just a small thing that sometimes may be overlooked, but is, of course, really important. And as we think about some tips for smooth amendments, I have some here that you can apply to help make this a much smoother process. I think these are habits, or maybe even some things that you can include into a checklist for your practice when filing amended returns. So one important thing is if your client owes additional tax, it's important to make sure that tax is paid within 21 days. If it's greater than $100,000 due, that should be paid within 10 days. The IRS, of course, doesn't wait for payments to be made, and the late filing penalties will add up pretty quickly. If you've had any experience with that, you'd probably agree. The amended return might take months to process, as we just talked about, but the payment still needs to happen within that time frame to avoid those additional penalties and interest in some cases. When you're preparing Form 1040X, it's really important to be very clear in the explanation of changes. When you look at a Form 1040X, there is a area to write why you are amending. It's really important to be clear and specific. It doesn't mean you have to write a lot, but it should be a complete explanation and avoid, vague statements like updated income. Well, be more specific, like added a missing W-2. That is a little bit better, more clear. It's a good idea to tell what changed and where the updated figures are coming from, like the W-2. It helps the IRS process the return and speeds up that processing time and clears up questions that the reviewer may have during the process. So I think it's a good tip. Sometimes I think some of us may want to be intentionally vague, but in this case, it could slow down that processing. Another important tip is to attach all required documentation. That means if you have corrected W-2s or new 1099s or revised schedule, make sure to attach anything that supports the changes. If it ties to the amendment, include it. Missing documents are one of the top reasons amended returns get delayed or rejected. And of course, if you're using tax software to file that, most of those should go along with the amendment very seamlessly. And again, I mentioned this before, but you want to be aware of filing deadlines and don't lose track of those deadlines. Refunds, again, can be claimed generally within 3 years of the original due date of the return or 2 years after the tax is paid, whichever is later. And if you miss the window, it could really be bad news for your taxpayer, especially if the IRS owes them money. So keeping track of those deadlines is really important. And again, be sure that all forms are signed, including that 8879. I just mentioned that. It needs its own 8879. Never send duplicate 1040s, so don't send a 1040 instead of the 1040X if you're attempting to amend it, and don't send another 1040 if you intend to supersede it without marking it superseded. And again, this is a very simple tip, but one that seems to happen at the IRS is not waiting till after the original return is processed before filing Form 1040X. If you're not, you're trying to fix something the IRS hasn't recorded in their system yet, and it may create a mess, and the taxpayer may end up getting letters and conflicting information from the IRS. So it's really better to wait on those. And again, building this checklist into your process is going to help you avoid like 80% of the common adjustments and errors that the IRS sees on their side. So I have some additional best practices, more so than a checklist, but best practices when you have someone that needs to file an amended return. The first thing that I would always recommend anyone do, whether you're amending or superseding, specifically for amending, is get a copy of the original return. Now, if you prepared the original return, that should be pretty simple. But if it is prepared by the taxpayer or someone else, it's really important to see what was filed on the original return. Sometimes, the client thinks something was filed, but it isn't actually what was sent. So I recommend that you obtain a transcript. And I'll talk about some ways to get that. And when you finish or before filing an amendment, I recommend saving the hard copies or the actual documents to PDF. And I think that is a good practice to build into your process when the return is filed. In Drake, we automatically archive returns when they're selected for e-file. So we have that, but it's a good practice to save that just like you would. We were doing this 30 years ago and we are saving it to a file cabinet. Think of a PDF as a copy of that return on file. That way you always have that original hard copy of the PDF. The next tip I have here, best practice, is to archive the software data file. In Drake Tax, we have a specific tool which is archive, which makes a backup of that software data file. That's the file that calculates in your software, so that you can have the originally filed version and the amended version. You can make archives for any scenario, but amended return is critical. If you don't have that feature in your tax software, I think that it's really important to do a backup of your data, so you have that return data, like the file that is saved in your software. So you have the original and the e-file, and the amended version. So make sure you have a backup of that originally filed return. Review state guidelines for amending returns. And I think this is really important. And sometimes I get questions from taxpayers or tax pros even about the rules of the state. And every state is a little different. Every state has different guidelines and rules for e-filing or filing amended returns. So knowing what's happening in your state is really important. Now, if you're working in one state and you have a taxpayer from another state you may not be familiar with, it's great to get up to speed on that before working on the amended return, just so you know what's required and, things like timing, e-file eligibility, things like that. It's really important. Now, one thing that's really important is to manage your taxpayer expectations. And you may already be really good at this, but I see and talk to so many professionals who are exhausted by managing their taxpayers' questions. So I think it's really a great idea to understand, make sure the taxpayer understands how long this amendment can take. Let them know it can take 16 to 20 weeks. Maybe consider under promising and over delivering, and let them know that interest could apply and that if they're expecting a refund, it's not going to show up next Friday. And this clarity up front really helps your clients know what to expect, so they're not constantly reaching out to you about what to expect next or when that's happening. And finally, this is big, and I talk to tax pros all the time who don't charge for amended returns. And I think it's really important to charge for your time. Amending a return isn't just hitting an edit and clicking send. Sometimes it can be like detective work, and it means comparing transcripts, comparing original filings, gathering new documentation in some cases. Sometimes the return needs to be recalculated, and sometimes even dealing with IRS correspondence for weeks or months. So you're not just fixing a typo. So I just want to encourage everyone not to undervalue your work here, because you want to be helpful. It's a professional service that has value attached. So that's it. I just wanted to say that. I think it's a great idea to be sure and charge for your time, because I see so many people that may not. Of course, there may be a time when you don't want to do that for your customer relations and things like that. So one thing that can really help managing expectations for your taxpayer is a tool at the IRS website. It is Where's My Amended Return? And this is a tool, of course, at irs.gov, much like Where's My Return or Where's My Refund, and I have the URL right there on the screen. However, you can simply Google it, Where's My Amended Return? And this is meant for taxpayers to use, but they can type in some information about the return and see where it is in the processing process. So one thing to note, it may take up to 3 weeks to show in the tool. And you can see the current year and up to 3 prior year tax years in the tool. So if you manage your customers' expectations, let them know it's going to take weeks. Give them a link to this tool so they can track it themselves and not need to reach out to you for that. They'll probably appreciate the transparency there. There are some scenarios where the tool can't be used. Things like amended business returns, if an amended return has a foreign address, or if it's a 1040 return that's been marked amended or corrected, if it has to go to ERS or the special examination. And so there's a few other things. All of those exceptions are listed on the website too, so you can see that very easily. Okay. And I think that brings us to our next poll question.
All right, this is poll question number 3, and we're curious to know, do you charge an additional fee to prepare an amended return? And your options are yes, no, or it depends. So go ahead and pick the answer that, be honest, that most relates to you.
Thank you, Gail. Hopefully we have people that maybe charge. I see a lot of people pick or choose. It depends on the circumstance, but I think it's totally appropriate. In some cases, it may be the error of the pro and they don't want to charge for that, which is understandable. And it looks like about 50% of you have so far picked. It depends on the circumstance, but a little more than 10% or around 10% say no. So I guess it depends on how you have set up your pricing structure. Maybe sometimes you have that built into maybe a retainer, something like that. So it's interesting. Okay. One of the things I would like to mention, I think we should talk about is interest and penalties. And often I see this being overlooked and sometimes misunderstood. The aspects of amending returns, interest and penalties don't necessarily start from the day of the amendment. They start counting in several cases on the original due date of the return. And that's why it's really important to pay any additional balance due within that time frame we discussed earlier, to be sure and not incur any additional penalties and or interest. So even if your client filed an extensions and they amended the return 2 years later, the IRS can start calculating interest from that original April deadline. And that surprises a lot of people, especially taxpayers who may not understand how that works, because they often assume, I should say, that the extension of time to file, of course, extends the payment deadline, and it doesn't. So when we talk numbers here, the IRS charges 0.5% for each month for unpaid tax, up to a maximum of 25%. So the longer a client waits to fix an underpayment, even in the case of an amendment, the more expensive it gets, and it adds up really quickly, especially when that's on top of any interest owed. And there's another one to consider, and that is if the IRS considers a return to be frivolous, meaning the return has no legal basis. And of course, I think when most of us are working with amended returns, we're dealing with honest mistakes in most cases, missed income, forgotten forms, misapplied credit. But it's really important to communicate that clearly to your clients. So if they think there's a fraudulent amendment, they can impose a penalty. So also, I think it's really important to also know that filing an amendment doesn't necessarily wipe the slate clean. It just corrects the record. So any tax that is owed originally is still, of course, aging from the due date of the return. So when in doubt, pay promptly and help your clients understand that. I think that's really important. Okay, so earlier when we were talking about some best practices, I mentioned getting transcripts. And the IRS has a great tool at the IRS Pro account that can help you get transcripts very efficiently. And if you want to submit a power of attorney or a POA, you can use Form 2848, or you can request tax information authorization, a TIA, on Form 8821. And both of those can be obtained through the IRS Tax Pro account. And hopefully most of you already have a Tax Pro account. And if you don't, I recommend getting one as soon as you can, because it really speeds up that process for authorization or for the power of attorney. And if you're not sure what that is, it's an online portal at the IRS website that allows you to digitally access your client's information and manages authorizations like the TIA and the POA without paper forms or wait times. And it's of course part of the IRS's effort to modernize practitioner services. and reduce reliance on fax, mail, and phone calls. So I actually logged into my IRS Tax Pro account, and I can see all of my authorizations. One really important thing you can do is revoke something. Maybe you have an authorization that was in place a year ago and you no longer need that, but it's still kind of hanging out there. You can go in there and revoke that very quickly, which I think is something we may overlook. You can electronically submit the 2848 and the 8821. No faxing, no mailing. You can manage all of those active authorizations. You can access your client's data very quickly, including, again, like those return transcripts. That's going to be really helpful, especially if you didn't prepare the return. You can also see things like account balances, payment history. It can even help you respond to notices faster, especially when you have those time-sensitive ones. And authorizations, and when using the IRS Tax Pro account, are almost instant when both parties authenticate. So if you don't have a CAF number, for example, you can go right in here and click request a CAF number, and you can get one almost immediately. If you're eligible for one, that is. So your clients can approve that access electronically. They can go into their account and say, yes, this tax professional can see my transcript. So it reduces a lot of back and forth, especially when you're working with remote or busy clients. So if you haven't tried this, I think it's really helpful. Robert mentioned linking an account on the IRS page hasn't worked in months. I'm not sure what that means, but the IRS Tax Pro account, I haven't heard of any issues with that. But it does require that you have, I think, an ID Me account, which is very helpful because you're also using that for your PTIN account and e-services. Again, you can think of the Tax Pro account like your fast lane to the IRS. It saves you a lot of time, including weeks. And it's really interesting. If you haven't tried it, I recommend that you, check it out. And it really is pretty neat once you go in there. But back to the transcripts. If you're not familiar with the difference in the power of attorney, I just want to go back one slide, and the 8821, depending on your designation, may be what you need here. The power of attorney is what you need when you represent clients in front of the IRS. It allows you to speak to the IRS agents, respond to notices, exams. You can negotiate on behalf of the clients, but you must generally be a credential preparer, like an enrolled agent, a CPA, an attorney, or an enrolled actuary, something like that, to get power of attorney. The 8821 will help you get the taxpayer information authorization, the TIA. And it's a little less powerful than the power of attorney, but it's still incredibly useful, especially when you're considering working with amended returns. It's going to let you do things like pull transcripts, view account balances. You can review the filing history of any returns or payments. And you don't have to be credentialed in order to use the form, which is helpful for some of you that may not have the one of the authorities that would allow you to be POA, like a EA or CPA or attorney. So it can also help like some admins. Maybe you have an office manager. Getting the TIA would help in that case too. So no matter what you are eligible to get or what you need, you can do that at the Tax Pro account. So I wonder how many of you have used the Tax Pro account, and if you haven't, now's a really good time to do so. It's early January. The IRS e-file hasn't opened yet, so you may have a little time as you're in the office getting everything ready for tax season. It's a great time to do that. So when we think about all the things we've talked about today, I think that it's really important to walk away with, when we're thinking about amended returns, is the timing. And timing is very significant, and timing matters when we're talking about amended and superseded returns. If you're within that original filing window, remember, if something needs to change, superseding the return is probably a great choice. It's a clean replacement, and it often saves your client from unnecessary delays, notices, and maybe even scrutiny. But if you're past the deadline, don't hesitate. You can amend the return, but be sure and be very clear about why you're amending it when you complete the 1040X. And of course, I recommend e-filing everything that you can as opposed to paper filing. So, using e-filing will help you have a faster, cleaner process that gives you a little bit more control. You have some digital tracking in there. You can use the direct deposit for refunds, and it just really works nicely in your favor. Now, again, just to recap, you can only e-file or supersede 3 times for each taxpayer for tax year, and every submission needs its own 8879. And third, I think is really important is just, and it's what sets great tax pros alike. And I'm sure that you guys do this because you've taken the time to come to a webinar and increase your understanding and earn continuing education credits, is communication. Communication from tax pros really help the taxpayers, and it's going to make everything a lot easier. Be upfront with your clients about timelines and be really meticulous with your documentation, as you probably already are. And of course, charge for your work and be transparent, tell them why you're charging. And it's not just fixing numbers when we come to amending returns and superseding return. It's help your client stay in good standing with the IRS. And that's what's really important. So I do see a question here that I want to address. It says, does a POA or TOA allow us to access a client's ID.me? No, Wendy, you cannot log into the IRS using the client's ID.me account. That's not what a power of attorney maybe. That's not what it's intended for. The client would log into their online IRS account and say, if you wanted to obtain power of attorney, they could go in and said, hey, yes, Wendy now has power of attorney, and sign the appropriate documents or authorize the appropriate documents. But generally, that you would not log in as the client or the taxpayer. Elvira says, how do you convert files to PDF? Well, it depends on what you're converting, but you should be able to print or save to PDF from many applications. Just to confirm, the Form 8879 is returned by the tax preparer and not submitted to the IRS. And the 8879, when you transmit a return, all of the signature documents will be sent along with the file itself, but you are definitely required to retain that. And Val asks, is there a special form for superseded return? Generally not. There is a place to mark that it's a superseded return. And if you're using tax software, it should do all of that for you. So that's it should be pretty simple. It's a matter of checking a box. So with that, I have one last poll question, but before we do that, I really wanted to thank you for your time today. In our last poll question, we'd love to tell you more about Drake software. I'll hand it back over to Gail.
Okay. First of all, before we do our last poll question, I just want to thank you, Amanda, for an incredible presentation with lots and lots of useful information, and remind you all that the slide deck for this presentation is available in the event resources option. So if you want to rehash any of these slides, you can pull it down there. And we will be producing this, the archived version of this on our website at cpapracticeadvisor.com/webinars after this is over. Let's go ahead and we went ahead and posted our last polling question. I just want to let you know that Drake has offered to provide us with a 15-minute demo of their product, which is not required for CPE. So if you have the time and can stay with us and can watch that, please go ahead and select yes on that polling question. And we'll be doing that right after I stop talking. But first of all, a reminder, you'll be getting your CPE certificate later today in your email. Look for an email from CPA Practice Advisor. The CE credits will be directly submitted to the IRS. If you have any questions about CPE or CE, you can contact me directly at gperry, G-P-E-R-R-Y, at cpapracticeadvisor.com. Also, if others are watching this event with you at the same computer and they require continuing education credit, you can email me their names and email addresses. And if they require CE credit, include their PTIN number. And again, that's gperry@cpapracticeadvisor.com. And if you stay with us for the 15-minute demo that Drake is about to provide, we will present you with a post-event survey evaluation form about this webinar, and we'd love it if you'd take a moment to fill that out too. Okay, thank you, everyone. And now we're turning this over to Bethany, who's going to do the Drake demo for us.
Hi, everybody. I'm making sure everybody can hear me. Amanda, give me a nod if you guys can hear me. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, you will not see me because I want you to see my software. So I'm going to go into my Drake product very quickly for you so that you can see my software as we move along this presentation. All right, so right now you should be looking at my Drake tax product. And for those of you who stayed, welcome. I'm so glad you guys have listened to Amanda. She is beyond knowledgeable when it comes to all things tax related, especially when it comes to those superseded and those amended tax returns. My job now is to kind of show you what Drake has to offer. We're going to do it very quickly. That way you don't have to listen to me very much, but I want to show you the lay of the land, so to speak. And what you see on your screen right now is what we call our home screen of the Drake product. So anytime we talk to people, they have the same things involved. They want to be more productive, which of course also makes them more money and revenue if they're more productive, but they also want to be very accurate, which again, also makes them more money on the back end. So I'm going to show you some things that are going to help you do that with the Drake product. Now, again, what you see here is the home screen of the Drake program. And up across the top, you're going to see menu items, which perform various functions and tasks within the software. Down below that, you're going to see a toolbar, which also performs various functions and tasks in the program. And it's just to give you a quick way to get to where you need to go or navigate to where you need to go. Of course, if you are looking on this toolbar, you see something that we call CSM, that actually stands for Client Status Manager. It is going to be a broad overview of this, what you see here on the home screen called Personal Client Manager. These two things work together. The Personal Client Manager is unique to the individual or the preparer who has logged in to the software. It is going to show them the client's returns that they've worked on and keep up with what point the process that tax return is in. The CSM is the Client Status Manager, and this is going to show you all of the clients and all of the preparers that might be in your software. So just think of the Personal Client Manager as a window into the actual Client Status Manager. Now, they look very similar and the same, but you can adjust the columns that you see here, so you can customize it to your needs. You also can see that we have some color coding here, and that just means that we have color coded it to our needs. And it's easy way for us to kind of keep up with what point the process the tax returns are in. It's very visual for me when I have it color coded, because I can quickly see that anything in red has been electronically filed and rejected. Anything in blue is in progress. Now, these are colors that I have chosen, but you can choose whatever colors you want, and we do have training available for that. Your Client Status Manager, however, again, it would show all of the clients on your system, and you can filter it out. Right now, I have it just on corporate returns, which clearly I don't do any. But if I wanted to, I could open it up and show all of the returns, and you would see all of the preparers on my system. Typically, the Client Status Manager is going to be more in depth because it's going to show you a lot more detail. But again, this is customizable for you, so you can change the columns that you see here. It's just a very fast way for you to kind of prioritize your day on who you need to focus on. Again, that's going to help you be more productive in the long run. To the right of that, you would see what we call our appointment scheduler. Now, we do give an appointment scheduler with the purchase of our software, and that, of course, helps you stay on point and on task for the day. Anytime we are structured, it's just like I look at kids in elementary school. When they have a structure, they're beyond beneficial to learn things. They grasp things easier. A repetition is always good. It works the same with us as an adult. If we have a structure, if we have that schedule going on, we are more productive too. We stay on task, on track for the day. So we do give you that appointment scheduler that you can see all of the appointments for every preparer in your office. You can have it set up where it will notify you that, hey, an appointment's coming in 10 minutes, so that you can start winding down what you're working on to gear up for who is coming in next. This is a great place to work with your preparers in your office because it also can sync up with an external calendar such as Outlook or Google. We have Drake Documents. Now, Drake Documents is a paperless office. It's literally just replacing those filing cabinets that might be in your office. So don't overthink it. I'm going to close this up a little bit for you so I can kind of start from beginning to end. But basically, it is just replacing all of those paper documents that are in those filing cabinets, putting them in a digital format on your computer. Now, that Drake Documents is included with the purchase of the product. So when you get the program, you have access to this already. And we are ranked #1 in the paperless office in this industry. So if you're taking a look at it, we would automatically give you a client cabinet here. And if I open that up, we'll have drawers of the alphabet that is based off of your client's last name. Now, you can see that some drawers are missing, some alphabet letters are missing, and that's because I don't have a client with that last name. And that's okay. We just don't want to gom it up or have too much information. No need for it to be there if we don't have that kind of person in. The great thing about it is when someone comes in and their last name starts with an A, we will start preparing that return. And in the back end, the Drake Documents would automatically create the file or the drawer and the file and the folder for that person. So if I wanted to open someone up here, I could just click on one of them. And as you can see, I'm drilling down to the tax year. It works hand in hand with the portals. So the portals would be that communication to and from your clients. It's a great way for you to contact them or obtain documents from them. This is a really good way to be productive because then you don't have to wait on them to come into your office to give you files. Maybe you want to go 100% virtual. Perhaps you have clients who've moved away, but they don't want to lose you as a tax preparer. You can access the portals. They can safely and securely upload all of their documents to you. You can retrieve them, and then you can prepare the return. At the end, turn around and send it back up to the portal so that they can get their finished tax return. You can use this throughout the tax season or throughout the year, but when you have that connection, that portals is going to be an additional fee, just so that you know. But that is something that you can purchase if you wanted to outside of the Drake product. But if you are connected and you did purchase it, you see that down on the bottom, it'll say, this is the documents from me as the preparer. This is the documents to me, so from my taxpayer. And then we can also use the portal as a backup cloud. So you always hear people back up, back up, back up. And you can actually use the Drake portals to back up those data files for your clients. So it has dual purposes. It has the ability to have that communication from and to your clients, but it also can be used as a cloud backup for yourself. You are able to message your clients from here. You can do remote signatures. So if you were wanting to do a true remote electronic signature where the client would get the document and sign said document through their computer, so there's no paper transaction whatsoever, you can do that as well. And there's also questionnaires, which are going to be very similar to your organizers that you might send at the end of or the beginning of tax season. So lots of things that you can do with these Drake portals. A great tool to have. It's a great option to have because a lot of people are already getting documents virtually anyway. If they do bank transactions, if they do, I know for myself, I don't receive a hard copy of a W-2 anymore. I have to go online and get that. So people are already getting these documents virtually. It's very easy for them just to upload it to your portal. You would get a notification via email that they have a document out there for, Leeward Catamaran or whomever it was. And then you could prepare that return and be more productive, just knocking returns out one after the other. So I'm just going to close this. I'm just kind of giving you an idea and an overview of all the things that we offer. So you have your paperless office and that portal. Now to the right of documents, you're going to see a tile that says workflow. Workflow is new for us. We just released it over the summer of 2025. And basically what it is a connection to your Drake website that you'll have access to as a Drake user, what we call Drake Hub. And it essentially is a workflow status. So very similar to the client status manager. The difference is the client status manager is keeping up with what point the process the tax return is in on your computer. The workflow is going to keep up with what point the process the tax return is on that website. So you don't even have to have Drake installed on the computer that you access the website, and you would be able to see that Mr. and Mrs. Element here has been e-filed, but it's still pending or whatever the case is. So that is something that you could play around with. We have training on, we have portals and access to portals here. We do have a partner relationship with Gruntworks, which is a scan and fill technology, and the tax library, which is the tax book for tax research. Of course, you have access to us to get assistance here on the right-hand side. On the left, you would see the last 9 files that the logged in preparer has worked on. If you had any appointments upcoming for the day, they would be listed there. And below that, you have your alerts and notifications to keep up with what is happening in the industry and what's happening here at Drake. So these are going to be a lot of helpful information as you go through your tax season. And of course, we want to make sure that you're always up to date. So we are showing you that the software is up to date, or if it's not up to date, we'd ask you to update it right then. Now I'm going to go ahead and go into a tax return that we already have. So let's go ahead and click on this Charlie Brown and Lucy here. And this is what the home screen or the data entry menu of the tax return looks like. You have tabs across the top so that you can access whatever tabs you need. Maybe you have something to fill out for healthcare. Click on that tab and click on the screen you need. Or down in the bottom left-hand corner, you can just type in a name, type in A, and it's going to go directly to that screen. Maybe you need to go to a 1098, and it's going to go directly to that screen. Making it very easy to find what you're looking for. Maybe you can't remember the screen name or number that you're looking for, so all you have to do is type in keywords. So if I type in some keywords, I'll put in education credits. It'll give me everything that pertains to those words, and I'm able to fix it or go into that screen as necessary. So lots of things that you can do here, easy navigation. Better yet, maybe you can't remember where is that amended return. We can put amended and it's going to take us to that amended screen. Now I'm going to show you how this works for Drake. It's going to be different for whatever software vendor you're using. But for us, you're just going to go into that screen. It's going to say, hey, do you want to automatically archive this return and fill the screen? And I'm going to say yes, because when I do that, it's going to put my original amount in here. And when I do that, it's created this screen for me. And if I scroll down, I can put my explanation of changes here. As Amanda had said earlier, you want to be as thorough as you possibly can. So, I'm sure that yours is going to be better than mine. If I forgot W-2, you're probably going to be much more in depth. If this is a superseded return, down on the bottom, you're going to mark that it's superseded. So very easy to do with our product. Now I'm just going to click escape. And then all I have to do is come to W-2 and add that W-2 as necessary. So that's a little easy way that we handle our W-2s, or not W-2s, our amended and superseded returns. Now up across the top, I'm going to click on view so I can actually see everything that has been generated. This lets me know whether or what's being created. Right now it does say it's a 1040X, lets me know about income, taxable income, comes over here and tells me I cannot electronically file that with that red X. In the middle of the screen, it's going to tell me why I can't e-file, conflicting information, which we kind of knew that. We're just kind of giving a quick overview here. And then we have all of the forms generated based off of what was plugged in to our tax return. Now we went into a return that was already had data in it. So this is just automatically going to show it. The only thing we created was that 1040X, which is right here. And then we could see exactly what the difference is if we had made changes, which we didn't do that. We were just quickly showing you how you can create it with Drake. So from here, I could go ahead and print. I know some people had some questions about printing to PDFs. It's super easy to print to PDFs. You'll just select what you want to print from us. So anything that has a check mark over here to the left, when I click print, all I have to do is change this printer to a Drake PDF printer, and the product knows it's going to go into that Drake documents, that paperless office for me at that time when I hit print. So very easy to navigate through our product. We make sure that to eliminate as much keystrokes as we possibly can, because anytime you eliminate keystrokes, you're saving yourself time. And anytime you save time, that either gives you free time to do other things during tax season, or it gives you more time to make more tax returns or to accept new clients in your office, whatever you're looking for. Now, if you are in this screen, up across the top, you have different items. You could go back to data entry, print, go to that documents or the portals. I could e-file if I wanted to, if it was ready to be e-filed, but we did have that message or diagnostic, so we know we can't do that. And then, of course, we can go to a kitty export, help, and exit. Inside of data entry, you have a little bit of different things. You have the calculate, view, print. We have a split feature. So if you have a client who is married filing joint and they want to see what's different married filing separate, you could do that from here. You have your paperless office that would access this client's paperless office. A tax planner, you will get a 2-year tax planner with Drake. So it's a great way for you to generate another source of revenue. If you don't do tax planning already, this is a great way for you to do that. You have an import feature here, the CSM, that is that client status manager. You could email from here. You have payments. If you want to accept debit or credit cards, you can do that with Drake under what we call Drake Pay. So that's available here if you wanted to do that. Help and exit. So there is essentially, when you're looking at Drake, we are a one-stop shop. You can do everything you need to with our product at one place. So if you are looking for someone who does tax planning, who does a paperless office, who does the portal, who does accept credit cards, who does do that workflow and ease of navigation through a tax return, then we are the group that you want to take a look at. So just very quickly, we do all shapes and sizes of tax returns, or not tax returns, but tax offices. So if you're a mom and pop shop and you're only producing 10, 20 returns, whatever, we have a package that can fit your needs. Maybe you're an office that you do 1,000 returns, but they're only 1040s. We have a package that fits your needs. Maybe you're that tax return or tax office that you do a multitude of business and individual tax returns with multiple preparers, maybe even multiple offices. We have something to fit your needs. So if you have questions on anything you saw today, or maybe you're just curious about other options that we have, maybe you want to window shop and see what packages are available from Drake, give us a call. Phone number is 1-800-890-9500. Like I said, we fit all shapes and sizes. So make sure you reach out to us and we'll see what we can do for you in your tax practice. Let us do the heavy lifting for you. We can get you a demo. We can do